Hello and happy International Women's Day. My name is Cathryn McWilliams. I am a doctoral researcher at Åbo Academy University in Finland. And for the past 7 years, I have been compiling and annotating the collected letters of Mary Ann McCracken and have written extensively on her life, her legacy and correspondence. I'm really hoping to complete my thesis this year and subsequently publish the letters and my findings. Mary Ann McCracken has become somewhat of an icon in Belfast during the century and a half since her death. Over the course of her 96 years, Mary Ann demonstrated leadership through a variety of political, historiographical, educational and philanthropic activities. From her involvement with the United Irishmen and her preservation of their memory, to her presidency of the Belfast Ladies Anti-Slavery Association, Mary Ann has proved an influential figure in many spheres. This talk will present the materials relating to Mary Ann within QUB special collections, and by extension will lead us on a path to the discovery of other archival treasures. Mary Ann McCracken was a keen promoter of the cultural revival of Ireland's ancient poetry, language, and music, most notably assisting Edward Bunting with the gathering and processing of materials for his collection of ancient Irish airs. Their friendship was forged in later childhood when, in 1784, the 12-year-old Bunting came to live at the Mccracken household while he acted as a substitute organist at St. Anne's Parish Church. He ended up staying with the Mccracken family until 1819. Evidence of Mary Ann's involvement in his work can be found within the library's Bunting collection in the form of a music notebook catalogued as manuscript notation of psalms and old airs. Here you can see the final page of one of the Irish airs entitled QUB. The musical notation ends after the third stave, as you can see here, but in the blank space below, we find a series of textual and numerical jottings alongside a doodle of what looks like a man's face, which has been repeatedly crossed out. If we take a closer look at the text, we find the following inscription. It says, November 15th, 1808, Miss Mary McCracken, Waring Street, her book, Belfast. Various Belfast street directories confirm that Waring Street was the site of Mary Ann and her sister Margaret's muslin business at this time. However, it's unclear whether or not the siblings were living on site. Indeed, if we turn to Mccracken's correspondence, we find a letter from Bunting to Mary Ann at this address, dated the 8th of March, 1809. A complete transcription of this 38-page manuscript can be found within Colette Maloney's The Irish Music Manuscripts of Edward Bunting, an Introduction and Catalogue. Maloney describes the notebook as, quote, a fair copy of airs and hymns written by Scribe G, Mary McCracken, end quote, wherein the mainly English hymns, run from the front of the book, while the Irish airs run from the back. Reflecting on Mary Ann's contribution, Maloney states that, quote, the source of these tunes is uncertain. It is unlikely, at any rate, that Mary McCracken had sufficient experience with notation to have transcribed them from live performances herself. It is more plausible that these tunes were copied from manuscripts or books, or that they were part of her repertory, end quote. Whatever the case, Bunting evidently trusted Mary Ann's abilities, as is affirmed throughout his letters to her, 23 of which can be found within Charlotte Milligan Fox's 1911 volume, Annals of the Irish Harpers. Although no extant correspondence of theirs can be found within the Bunting collection, several of Dr. James McDonald's letters do make reference to Mary Ann McCracken. A trained harpist, MacDonald was the chief organiser of the 1792 Belfast Harp Festival and a founder of the Irish Harp Society in 1808. On the 16th of August, 1840, MacDonald wrote to Bunting, quote, "The only harp maker in Belfast is the one who made Pat Murney's, which you heard. I think it was £8 it cost, and I was the paymaster. There are some ornaments upon it. If you desire it, Miss Mccracken and I might superintend the work and pay him as he proceeded, for he is poor." End quote. In another letter to Bunting, a month later, MacDonald wrote, quote, "I enclose you £9 and have given to our friend Mary the odd money for the 6 copies of your book that I had for sale. It is a great pleasure to see it completed." End quote. The book was, of course, Bunting's 1840 publication, The Ancient Music of Ireland, arranged for the pianoforte. And here you can see the title page for the volume. Charlotte Milligan Fox referenced this extract as, quote, "Dr. MacDonald and Miss Mccracken help its sale," unquote, leaving us in no doubt as to the Mary in question. Finally, in an undated letter, MacDonald informs Bunting, quote, "Your friend Mary is going on with her old capers. If she does not get a good berth in the other world, there can be no good in good works," end quote. This reference to Mary Ann's charitable acts, or her various avocations as she referred to them, grants us an insight into how her contemporaries viewed her. So we're going to move away now from the Edward Bunting collection and shift our focus to the library's collection of rare books, where we find a first edition of Edward Hay's History of the Insurrection of the County of Wexford, AD 1798, which bears the signature Mary Ann Mccracken upon its title page. The book is one of 3,000 copies sold at the time. It was published in 1803. And according to his biographer, Margaret O'Hogarty, Hay's account of the Wexford Rebellion was, quote, "clearly sympathetic towards the intrepid rebels, but critical of sectarian violence," end quote, a position Mary Ann herself would have entertained. Another valuable resource when researching Mary Ann's life can be found within Special Collections McNeill papers. Mary McNeill's biography, Mary Ann Mccracken, 1770 to 1866, Belfast Panorama, was first published with Alan Figgis in 1960. It was subsequently republished with Blackstaff Press in 1988, and then again in 1997, and then most recently with Irish Academic Press in 2019. The McNeill papers are principally comprised of letters between Mary McNeill, or Molly as she was known, and her sister Peg, who lived in England. Those letters spanning the 1950s allow us to trace McNeill's research for the book. We learn that in January 1950, she was reading the old minute books of Belfast Charitable Society. In October 1952, she says she is pursuing Mary Ann Mccracken in earnest. In 1953, she writes that she is frequenting the Queen's University Library in the evenings, where she read the microfilmed Mccracken letters provided by Trinity College Dublin. These microfilmed letters can now be found within the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland within their McNeill papers. With the bulk of the text complete by 1956, McNeill turned to the book's visuals. In a letter dated 13th of May, 1956, McNeill wrote to her sister, quote, "I went to the record office in Edinburgh, found the relevant will, and discovered that various Mccracken miniatures and bits of jewellery were left to an Aitchison man who, in 1927, lived in Bloemfontein." And that's in South Africa, end quote. Just over a month later, McNeill gave her sister the following progress report. "I thought I'd try a letter to Bloemfontein paper and also the Cape Times. And believe it or not, within a fortnight of my posting it, have I had a reply from the very man I was wanting to contact, the owner of the miniatures. There are 5 Mccracken miniatures, including one of Marianne and one of Marianne and her niece, and 3 unidentified ones. Mr. Aitchison said he was perfectly willing for me to have them photographed and implied that he would arrange it for me. The owner of these miniatures was Hugh Christopher Aitchison, a descendant of Marianne Mccracken's step-grandniece, Mary Mccracken Aitchison. So she was formerly Mary Mccracken Mccleary. Aitchison was as good as his word, as is confirmed in McNeill's letter of 30th of December, 1956. The photographs of the Mccracken miniatures in Bloemfontein arrived in the beginning of December. They are most amazingly interesting. Here we can see the envelope sent to McNeill by Aitchison containing in total 12 glass negatives relating to the Mccracken and Mccleary families. Her elation at the find is palpable. I wish you could see Marianne, aged 30, with little Regency curls across her forehead and a dog's head resting on her arm, and beside her, Harry's little daughter. It is absolutely priceless, Peg, and nobody here knows anything about them. This is a digitized copy of the glass plate negative found within Proney's McNeill papers. McNeill appeared quite confident of the sitters' identities and went on to reproduce the image within the biography, labelling it as Mary Ann Mccracken and her niece Maria, probably about 1801. Unbeknownst to McNeill, however, another Belfast historian had known about the miniatures and had gone to the trouble of making copies of them some 48 years earlier. 6 glass plate negatives of photographs, which captured 7 of the Mccracken miniature portraits, now reside within the National Museum of Northern Ireland's Biggar collection. Local historian Francis Joseph Biggar either made or donated the negatives in July 1908. Here you can see that the same image has been annotated by Biggar as, quote, black and white photograph of painting of Mary Mccracken and child, unquote. Although McNeill chose not to reproduce the miniature upon the front cover of the biography, all subsequent editions following McNeill's death in 1984 have chosen to have this image on their front cover. These papers also give an insight into the biography's reception. 2 years after its initial publication, McNeill informed her sister that, quote, over 1,000 copies were sold in the first year, which, economics apart, is, I think, rather staggering, end quote. This would suggest that there was considerable public interest in Mary Ann Mccracken's life even then. Indeed, the biography was by far McNeill's most successful publication and has remained the work from which most modern citations of the Mccracken letters are still drawn. In compiling a fully annotated scholarly edition of Mccracken's letters, I have attempted to expand upon and complement McNeill's work. I have also written extensively on the other Mccracken miniatures, which I will now turn to. Here you can see the image of Captain John Mccracken, Mary Ann's father. This is the image supplied to McNeill by Aitchison and which she reproduced on page 38 of the biography. This next one, we see Francis Mccracken, and you can see the image on the right-hand side. The miniature has been removed from the locket, and so it is much clearer. In this next one, we can see John Mccracken Jr, who looks remarkably like his elder brother, Francis. And again, it's much clearer in the Biggar collection image on the right. Here we have Anne Mccracken, née Joy, who was Mary Ann's mother. And this image was also used within the biography. But as you can see, there's actually within Prony, the reverse of the miniature, an image of the reverse of the miniature. We can see that it lies within a silver brooch pin locket. There's a glass case on the reverse, which reveals an assortment of human hair within. So if you look very closely, along the outer edge runs a plait made up of two different hair colours. This is separated from a looser plait of dark hair by an oval silver band. A piece of paper is stuck across the centre of the case and it reads, Mrs. John Mccracken, and then in brackets underneath, Anne Joy. This locket is in keeping with Victorian sentimental and mourning jewellery. The inner plait was presumably that of Anne Mccrackens, and the outer plait may have been made up of hair, of her own hair, or of that of her hair and somebody else's, perhaps the mourner. So in this next slide, we see James Mccleary. This was Maria Mccracken's father-in-law, and he was an engineer and surveyor for the Lagan Navigation Company and Belfast Water Commissioners. So on the reverse of his miniature, we can see there's a monogram, J. McC. And it's set at the centre of the glass case. And a piece of paper again is stuck beneath the initials, which reads James Mccleary, 1776 to 1852, grandfather to, and the name there would be Mary Mccracken Mccleary. Through the glass case, you can just make out a plait of two different hair colours. It's quite hard to make out. But if you squint very hard and imagine it, it might look a little like this. So here you can see a similar example of a Georgian miniature pendant containing hair work on the reverse. So that's presumably what it would look like in real life. Here then we have two unknown Mccrackens. Not as yet been able to identify these Mccrackens. And again, the first miniature there is the same, is one of the same gentlemen as featured in the one before. This is in the bigger collection. So there's actually 3 unidentified Mccracken miniatures. Finally, then we have this unknown Mccracken or Mccleary woman. This is only found within Prony. And if we turn back to the letters, to McNeill's letters, she says in one of them, there are 5 Mccracken miniatures, including one of Marianne and one of Marianne and her niece. So Mccracken stated this in the letter before she received the miniatures from Aitchison. Therefore, Aitchison must have suggested that this miniature was of Marianne. However, McNeill did not reproduce this image within her biography, which would suggest that she did not believe it to be of Marianne. It is possible that the sitter may have been Margaret Mccracken. Then again, it could have been Anna Mccleary or her sister, Mary Mccracken Mccleary. Special collections McNeill papers have proved essential to unlocking the story of these miniatures, and I thoroughly recommend that anyone interested in the life of this female independent scholar consult this collection. There is still plenty to discover there. I'd like to thank QUB Special Collections for hosting this International Women's Day lecture in this, the 250th year of Mary Ann Mccracken's birth. Thank you very much.